3 years in, it's got to be exhausting. I mean, just ask Jen Psaki or Karine Jean-Pierre. Every day it's clean up on aisle 5. We're going to take a look at some of these tall tales that the New York Times is citing, but not before I break down the shift that we're seeing in the media. Many of Biden's biggest allies, CNN, MSNBC, etc., are finally inching closer to the middle, at least in their pre-election analysis. They're reading polls that don't fit the Democrat narrative. They aren't ignoring Biden's painful and obvious gaffes. They finally stopped hiding from the glaringly obvious fact that Donald Trump is the leading presidential candidate in this race. Now, make no mistake, the left-wing media is certainly not supporting Donald Trump, but Joe Biden's historic incompetence has put even his most outspoken allies in a very tough spot. These talking heads claim to be journalists, and they now have an election staring them in the face. Our establishment media counterparts are finally waking up to the facts. Biden's cognitive tailspin can no longer be swept under the rug. The media mob is trying to save face. They know that their guy has no shot in November, but they also hate to be wrong. I mean, recall the priceless pre-election media montage of 2016 when they all laughed at the possibility of Trump becoming president? It never gets old. Well, they certainly don't want to be the last ones to the normalcy party when Donald Trump retakes the White House. The radical left media has a reputation to protect, after all. The New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, they aren't suddenly telling the truth about Biden because they believe in true journalism. Well, they're doing it because this decline is no longer deniable. You see it every single day. Let's get into this article right off the top. The New York Times absolutely shreds the lying president. In President Biden's telling, he was a teenage civil rights activist, a former trucker, the first in his family to go to college, and the nephew of a cannibalism victim. All of these claims stretch the truth or are downright false. Ouch. Now listen, you knew this to be true, I knew this to be true, but nobody believed Joe's babbling lies about his trucker days or the legend of his great Uncle Bossy, but sometimes the truth hurts to read, especially when it comes from a trusted friend like the New York Times. At least that's how I would imagine the feeling is inside the White House right now. The article goes on to address one of Joe's most repeated tales, his tireless devotion to the civil rights movement. For decades, Mr. Biden has occasionally suggested that he played a greater role in the civil rights movement than he actually did. There's no evidence that he was ever arrested. Again, we all knew that this was a lie. The civil rights movement was a transformative time in our nation's history, one with plenty of coverage. Joe's tall tales have all been debunked, not only by us here at Newsmax, but by pretty much any outlet with internet access. Folks, old Joe was never the civil rights activist that he claims to be, and his elaborate history of racist remarks should tell you just that.
Unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community.
Mainstream African-American, who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Awful, you ain't black. Yeah, I totally believe that guy was the voice of the civil rights movement. But let's get back to this article. In the interest of time, I'm going to fly through these next few lies. The left-wing media somehow let these all slide when Joe was on the campaign trail in 2020. Stories of little lunchbox Joe, the middle-class kid from Scranton, the first in his family to go to college, the guy who used to drive an 18-wheeler and never sniffed $400,000 in income. Lie, lie, and lie. Folks, I'd love to sit here and go through every lie that this article debunked, but we only have an hour together. It's time to jump right into some of Joe's best, starting with the legendary Uncle Bossy.
And my uncle, they called him Ambrose, Brosey, they called him Bozy. My Uncle Bozy was a hell of an athlete, they tell me, when he was a kid. And he became an Army Air Corps before the Air Force came along. He flew those single-engine planes as reconnaissance over war zones. He got shot down in New Guinea, and they never found the body because there were a lot of cannibals for real in that part of New Guinea.
Well, of course, none of that is true. The New York Times points out that Joe's absurd cannibal claims are not supported by military records or anthropologists or literally anyone else. This president is a pathological liar. He's getting worse by the minute right before our very eyes. With every single appearance, the president's slurred stories get more and more difficult to confirm.